Imagine for a moment that you wake up and the local ATM refuses to dispense cash. You drive to the nearest gas station, but the pumps are dry. You turn on the news, and the headlines are all the same. The government has run out of money. In the corporate world, when a company hits this wall, it liquidates. It shuts the doors, sells the office furniture, and the brand disappears. But a country is different. You can't evict a nation. The borders remain, the people are still there, and the president is still on television. Yet everything has changed. This is the paradox of national bankruptcy, or what economists more accurately call a sovereign default. Why is it that the United States can carry over $30 trillion in debt, while a country like Sri Lanka can lose control of a major strategic port because of a single unpaid loan? Today, we are going to look past the political headlines and deconstruct the mechanics of a national collapse. We will explore why countries fall into these debt traps, how the dominoes of trust fall once a default begins, and what it actually looks like for a nation to climb back from the brink. More importantly, we'll look at what this means for you, the professional, and how these systemic shifts redistribute wealth in ways that aren't always discussed in the media. To understand a country in default, we have to look at the one asset that isn't listed on a balance sheet but is more valuable than gold or oil. That asset is trust. When a country defaults, it isn't just missing a payment, it is signaling to the world that its word no longer has value. Unlike a person or a business, there is no international bankruptcy court that can force a nation to pay. There is no judge to seize the government's cars or buildings. Instead, what collapses is the invisible infrastructure of credit. Investors and lenders stop believing, and once that belief evaporates, the real-world consequences are immediate and devastating. Most people assume countries go broke simply because of corruption or mismanagement. While those are often the catalysts, the underlying math is usually more technical. It often starts with a debt trap. A government borrows money to build infrastructure or fund social programs, which seems manageable at first. But as the interest compounds, a larger and larger slice of the national budget is diverted just to pay that interest. Eventually, the country finds itself in a cycle of robbing Peter to pay Paul, taking out new loans just to cover the interest on the old ones. This works as long as there are willing lenders. The moment those lenders get nervous and stop the flow of new cash, the cycle breaks. This situation becomes a full-blown crisis when we factor in currency risk. Most global lenders prefer to lend in US dollars because it is the world's reserve currency. This creates a massive burden for developing nations. They collect taxes in their local currency, but they must pay back their debts in dollars. If their local currency loses value against the dollar, the cost of their debt effectively doubles or triples overnight. This is exactly what happened to countries like Venezuela. When oil prices crashed, their income plummeted, but their dollar-denominated debts stayed the same. To bridge the gap, they printed more local money, which led to hyperinflation, making their debt even more impossible to pay. When the news of a potential default breaks, the reaction is rarely a slow burn, it's a flash fire. Credit rating agencies downgrade the country's score, which acts as a global warning sign. Investors panic and start pulling their money out as fast as possible, selling off bonds, stocks, and local currency. Because everyone is selling at once, the value of the currency stays in a freefall. This is where the pain hits the average citizen. Suddenly, everything the country imports, food, fuel, medicine, becomes prohibitively expensive because it now takes 10 times as much local money to buy the same amount of dollars needed for trade. This leads to the most terrifying part of a default for the working professional, the bank run. As people see the value of their savings evaporating due to inflation, they rush to the banks to withdraw their cash. But banks don't keep all that money in the vault. It's tied up in loans and investments. When the panic hits, the system locks up. Governments often respond by freezing accounts or limiting withdrawals to prevent a total collapse. Factories that rely on imported parts shut down, workers are laid off, and the real economy begins to disintegrate. It is a domino effect, where a lack of trust in the government leads to a lack of trust in the banks, which eventually leads to a lack of trust in the very paper money in your wallet. However, a default isn't always the end of the story. Some nations do find a path to recovery, though it is never easy or quick. The first step is usually debt restructuring. The government meets with its lenders and asks for more time, or a haircut, which is a polite way of asking the lenders to forgive a portion of the debt. Lenders often agree because getting 50 cents on the dollar is better than getting nothing at all. But these deals almost always involve the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF. The IMF provides emergency loans, but those loans come with strings attached in the form of austerity measures. Austerity is a word that triggers protests in almost every language. It means the government must slash spending, raise taxes, and often sell off state-owned assets like airports or utility companies. To the people living through it, this feels like a loss of national sovereignty, a selling off of the country's future to pay for the mistakes of the past. Yet, for some, this painful medicine works. Consider Uruguay in 2002. They were hit by a massive bank run triggered by a crisis in neighboring Argentina. Instead of spiraling, they worked with the IMF and the United States, implemented serious reforms, and restructured their debt. Today, Uruguay is one of the most creditworthy and developed nations in South America. It is a rare success story that proves recovery is possible if the underlying institutions are strong enough to regain that lost trust. Now, we have to address the question that often dominates corporate boardrooms. Can the wealthy nations, specifically the United States, ever truly go bankrupt? The U.S. has a unique advantage, often called exorbitant privilege. Because the U.S. borrows in its own currency, the dollar, it can technically never run out of money to pay its debt. It can always print more. However, this is not a cheat code for infinite wealth. Printing money to pay debt is the fastest way to trigger massive inflation, which would devalue the dollar globally and destroy the very trust the system is built on. We've seen moments where the U.S. came dangerously close to a technical default, not because of a lack of money, but because of politics. The debt ceiling crises of 2011 and 2023 caused credit rating agencies like Standard & Poor's and Fitch to actually downgrade the U.S. rating. They weren't worried that America couldn't pay. They were worried that the political system was becoming too unstable to guarantee that it would pay. Japan is another outlier, with debt levels exceeding 200% of its GDP. They avoid default because most of their debt is owned internally by their own citizens and institutions, which creates a level of stability that foreign-owned debt can never match. Ultimately, a sovereign default is not a mathematical error, it is a political and social failure. It is the moment when the collective fiction we call an economy stops being believable. For the professional, the key takeaway is that a default is the ultimate redistribution of wealth. In these moments, the value of paper assets and local currency often vanishes, while tangible assets and those who control the mechanisms of trade often emerge stronger. As we look at the global landscape today, the question isn't just about which country might be next to default. The real question is how resilient your own financial ecosystem is to a sudden evaporation of trust. In our next session, we will dive deeper into the specific strategies that high-net-worth individuals and corporations use to hedge against sovereign risk, and how you can apply those same principles to protect your own future. If this video was helpful, make sure to like and subscribe for more insights about money and the global economy.